Hey everybody! So I know it's been a little over a week since I posted, but I was trying to decide which book I wanted to read, if I wanted to kind of do something different, or if I wanted to do kind of another American Revolution book to keep on track of what we've been talking about and what y'all are doing right now. So I decided that we are going to start the I Survived book, The American Revolution, 1776. This is by Lauren Tarshis. Hope I'm saying her name right. Should have probably looked that up before. I'm excited that I actually get to read from an actual book. Thank you, Miss Stovall, for sending me these. I'm really excited. So I hope y'all are all doing well. I hope y'all are kind of getting used to this social distancing and online schoolwork. If y'all hear anything, I know I'm outside, so I'm sorry. I wanted to kind of read somewhere different. So let's get started. I'm really excited because I've never read these. I know a lot of y'all like these, so this is really cool. So the very front, it says, "To all brave, healthy, able-bodied, and well-disposed young men in this neighborhood who have any inclination to join the troops now raising under George Washington for the defense of the liberties and independence of the United States against the hostile," it's very small, I don't know what that says, "and foreign enemies, take notice." So this is a cool little sign that they have put out during the war to try and get people to enlist in their army. So chapter 1, August 29th, I have hair in my mouth, 1776, Brooklyn, New York. Nathaniel Fox was too young to be fighting in the Revolutionary War. He was only 11 years old. But here he was on a blood-soaked battlefield in Brooklyn, New York. Thousands of British soldiers were on the attack, and Nate was sure that he was going to die. Gunfire crackled through the air. Crack! Cannon's blast shook the ground. Kaboom! Already one of Nate's friends was lying dead in the dirt, shot through the heart. And now Nate was running for his life. He tore through the thick forest, dodging trees and stumbling over the rocks. His mind swirled with fear. Blood pounded in his ears. And then came an even more terrifying sound. Heavy footsteps right behind him. Nate whipped his head around in panic. Over his shoulder, he saw an enormous soldier chasing after him. The man's musket was aimed at Nate's back. Attached to the gun's tip was a killing sword, a bayonet. Nate ran faster, desperate to escape, but he could hear the man's pounding steps and his grunting breaths. "I'm not a soldier," Nate wanted to scream, but it was too late. The man was closing in. Closer, closer, closer. Nate braced himself for the killing stab. He was sure this was the end. But then came an ear-shattering blast. Boom! Nate saw flames, a blinding light, and the world went black. Chapter 2. 7 weeks earlier, July 11th, 1776, 12 o'clock noon, Norwalk, Connecticut. Nate crawled under his uncle's vegetable garden, tugging up weeds and flicking away fat green worms. The burning sun cooked his back. His muscles ached for hours from work. But even worse was the sound of his uncle's voice barking through the open dining room window. His uncle was talking about the war with England. Nate peeked through the window. His uncle, Uriah Storch, was sitting at the fine wooden table. He was eating his noon meal with his best friend, Mr. Marston. But there was nothing delicious about watching Scorch gobble the leg of a roasted goose. Scorch pretended to be a gentleman, but Nate had seen hogs with better manners. "George Washington should be hanged," Storch said, saying with cracking the poor goose's bone in his large teeth. So, here's the picture. I'm going to say that one's Mr. Scorch, and that's Nate's uncle on this side. George Washington was the commander of the American army. Most people in Connecticut loved George Washington. They called themselves patriots, which meant they were rooting for the Americans to win the war. But Storch and his pal were on England's side. What are they called? Storch hated George Washington more than he hated the fleas that crawled around in his curled white wig. Storch turned around to the kitchen and bellowed, "More meat!" Seconds later, Eliza hurried in, carrying a silver platter piled high with fresh goose. Eliza stood patiently while the men heaped food on their plates. She'd been up since dawn cooking this meal. But neither of the men thanked her or even looked at her. Nate hated living here with Storch. But Eliza had it far worse. Nate was his nephew. Eliza was Storch's slave. Nate caught Eliza's eye through the window. He pushed together his lips and puffed out his cheeks. His best Storch imitation. Eliza raised her eyebrow at Nate, a reminder that he'd better watch himself. Storch was always looking for an excuse to give Nate a whack with his walking stick. He would not be happy to see Nate's blue eyes peering through the window. Nate ducked away. He had hours of work left to do, but he needed a break from the heat. He went to a shady spot under the cherry tree and looked down at the Long Island Sound. He loved watching the ships sailing by. Nate closed his eyes and pretended he was on one of those ships, heading out to the open sea. His mind filled with sounds of flapping sails and squawking seagulls. He imagined a cool sea breeze ruffling his hair. He could practically feel his father's strong hand rested on his shoulder. Papa had been a ship's captain. After Nate's mama got sick and died when Nate was just 4, Papa started taking Nate along with him on his voyages. Nate grew up crisscrossing the ocean with Papa and his crews. What a happy life. Sure, not every kid would want to grow up on the sea. The creaky wooden sailing ships were crawling with rats. The stale, wormy biscuits could break your teeth. Nate's bed was a hammock, hanging from the ceiling. But none of that mattered, because Nate was with Papa. Nate pictured his father's green eyes flashing from under his old sailing cap, his black ponytail waving in the wind. He'd wrap his arm around Nate's shoulder as they stood on the deck, looking out at the endless ocean. "You never know what's ahead," Papa would say, his eyes brimming with excitement. But now a wave of sadness crashed over Nate. Papa died almost 2 years ago while they were sailing home from a trip to the Caribbean islands. The voyage had been smooth with steady winds, a glassy sea, and a crew of 10 men. Nate's favorite crew member was Paul Dobbins, a joking 8-year-old with bright hair and a gap-toothed grin. He'd sailed with Papa before and had always treated Nate like a favorite brother. They had been halfway through the 3-week voyage home when they sailed into a path of a wicked storm. It came out of nowhere, a ferocious squall with swirling black clouds, pounding rain, and lightning that tore open the sky. The winds blew like dragon's breath. Waves crashed over the deck. Papa and his crew worked frantically, sliding across rain-soaked decks and pushing through the whipping winds. Giant, twisting waves spun the ship like a toy. The crew managed to take down the sails, but then a 20-foot wave grabbed a hold of Papa and swept him off the deck. In a blink, he was swallowed up by the sea and gone forever. Suddenly, Nate was an orphan, with just one living relative in the world, the uncle that Papa had always hated. Papa had stayed away from Storch, a man who was mean as he was rich. Storch was the last person Papa would have ever wanted Nate to live with. But where else would Nate go? Paul had promised to stay in touch. He hugged Nate tight and sworn he'd always look after him. "We're blood, you and me," he said. But that was just talk. Nate hadn't heard a peep from Paul in 2 years, and he had no idea why. Nate knew he should be thankful that Storch gave him a home. Plenty of orphans had ended up as beggars. At least Nate had family to take him in. Except Storch never treated Nate like family. A stray dog was more like it. Eliza, who made sure Nate knew he wasn't alone in the world. During Nate's first month with Storch, he was tortured by nightmares. He'd wake up and find Eliza sitting by his bed. She'd be gripping his hand tight, like she'd just pulled him out of the churning sea. She was Nate's family now. Nate stood there under the cherry tree, his mind swirling with sad memories. He was so distracted, he didn't hear the footsteps creeping up behind him. Something poked his back. A voice growled, "Back to work or I'll chop you up." Ooh, I would not want to be Storch's nephew either, with the way he's sounding. I'm going to stop there, and I will post a video with chapters 3 and 4. I'm going to do the same thing. We're going to read 2 chapters at a time. So I'm going to stop at chapter 3, and I will be posting the next 2. So keep watch. I miss you guys. I'll see y'all later.